Perfect. So my name is Philippe, and I'm here with Lucas Titon. You can see there in the call, and we're from CONAFER, and uh, we're the Brazilian Confederation, National Confederation of family farmers and family entrepreneurs, rural family entrepreneurs, which is why we have that name, CONAFER. And I'm bringing today a presentation which we talked about between me and Chitong and me and Clara from ACED, and we came to the conclusion that we should introduce the diversity in the family farming, let's say, category in Brazil, because we have a lot of different communities who have different backgrounds and they perform different activities. But in Brazil, they are in the same, let's say, spectrum of family farming. So we're going to focus a little bit on that. So there's going to be a little bit of a extended monologue from me where I'm going to just lay out a few, some information. And then Chiton is going to bring more concrete experiences that are happening right now in Brazil or that have recently happened. And then we're going to open if there are any questions or comments. So I'm going to share my screen and let's find the right tab. Here. So we're going to share that and we're going to go to, now I can't see anything. There you go. And that's the wrong place. Let's start the presentation. So in the title, we have the regenerative agriculture aspect of our talk. And when I was making this presentation, I wasn't sure of how to present it. And I think I ended up deciding to have a narrative that's focused around people. So in order to be able to work regeneratively, that requires a community in the land. So yes, this is going to be a very general introduction to these specific communities. Some important information first. So in 2017, that's the most recent data we have, more than 70% of the food consumed in Brazil was produced by smallholding local farmers, known as family farmers, which you probably know already, and I'll already apologize if I'm repeating things that have already been said in previous talks. But within, unfortunately, within our food producing sector, it is the big landowners that own most of the land and contribute the least to our food security in the country. And their objective with that, these large scale landowners, especially thinking about land that they don't yet own, is a process that includes several very profitable activities in today's economy, which is logging, which leads to fires, especially in the Amazon, to clear away that space for the next thing, which is this or this. So you can see the monoculture there taking over that whole space. And whereas you could have a forest, even behind this, let's say, the soy here that's being harvested, even behind that you have more soy, and you can't see the forest anymore. That eventually leads to this, which is the let's say I don't like the word degenerated, but this is the landscape after consecutive uh, monocultures have been grown. And you can see where you have you had the farms, it's desertified, and even around it you have spots here and there that are already degraded. Degraded, that was the word I was looking for. We understand that there are a lot of ways to regenerate biome, and agroforestry systems are a really powerful tool because they will mesh a lot of different knowledges in order to bring back that native vegetation, but also having the food production, which is necessary for the survival of some communities and for income. So after that, oops. And what agroforestry systems try to do is over different cycles, they will, going back here, they will cover this first area with, let's say, grass or other herbs, uh, which will be able to grow in that sandy environment, and that will lead to the next cycle where you can have more bushy plants, trees, eventually small trees. Then you start introducing foods, and then a few years later, you'll have your agroforest, and a lot and many years later, you may have your forest back. And that's what an agroforest may look like. And you can see here the corn, and that's together with bananas. We have small trees as well, which are probably fruit trees, and you have bushes here, which can also be fruits or berries, and that's all surrounded by the native vegetation. And that's what you want to see, even in this climate, which is a bit more dry. You can see the mountains. So it's not really about being able to apply agroforestry to a specific biome, but it being a tool to bring back the native vegetation, especially if it's done in a way that tries to do that, that introduces uh, native vegetation back into the system. I found this graph when I was assembling this presentation, and I think it's interesting because it's a more conventional way of looking at what agroecology or agroecological systems are, and agroforestry is within that idea of agroecology. So it will bring back local, indigenous, ancient knowledge and wisdom, and also utilize some technical aspects of Western or modern day, let's say, agriculture, but of course, not what is, uh, let's say, obviously not monoculture and using pesticides. Uh, but I just wanted to use that to get to here, which it's in Portuguese, but you probably can understand the idea, whereas agroecology is not a science or method specifically. There are different ways of thinking about agroecology, of doing agroecology, but we can say generally that it can include these three umbrella dimensions, one of which is the technical aspect, which I think I've covered regarding the environment and food producing techniques which respect the environment. It will also encompass the dimension of access to basic rights and infrastructure. You can't have a community producing agroecologically if they don't have access to clean water, or if there's no healthcare in these communities. Of course, they will strengthen themselves towards that, but they can always use state support and so on. And that leads us to the political dimension, in which uh, you have a few very important, um, agendas, let's call it agendas, political agendas that are in the interest of society, that are in the interest of these communities, not only to restore the environment and to have better relationship with nature, but in order to be able to have their livelihoods, they need to have access to land. And as we talked about briefly before, in Brazil, there's a high concentration of the land. And we'll go back to the land reform. I just want to introduce first these ideas. The second one is demarcation, which applies to indigenous land and to land in which you have other types of traditional communities in Brazil, which we'll also talk a bit more about in the next slides. And both of these issues also have a threat against them, which is land grabbing, which is people who are either already big landowners and they're hiring people to acquire even more land, or they're people who, through violence, want to become large landowners, and they will basically steal more or less violently land from small from family farmers, from indigenous people, from other traditional communities, and so on. And so going back and focusing on land reform, there is a big historic movement in Brazil, because it's not a new issue. It's something that's been there since colonization, right? The country was, to start with, divided into huge swaths of land that were given to noblemen, and that became the elites who still run the country, basically, to be very, very generalizing about it. But we have a land hoarding basically the same as it's been for hundreds and hundreds of years. So that results in the latest census showing us that over 200 million hectares of unproductive land in Brazil was present, and that 40% and that 40% of all large rural properties owned by these big landowners was unproductive. So, and on top of that, these areas are unproductive, but they're still protected by armed guards, by militias, or even the local authorities, because these local elites are the owners of that land. And there is a lack of political will in order to do land reform in Brazil, because even when you might have a more left-leaning government, the elite itself is still very uninterested in allowing the state to do that, and there's a lot of violence, and the process of claiming land can take a very long time, and there are steps to it. So a community may occupy an unproductive land, which according to the Brazilian constitution can be expropriated because it's unproductive. It's not fulfilling its social role in society. So that is a right that is present, but nevertheless, it's difficult to get a lawyer. It's difficult to physically demarcate the land, to measure it, to conduct studies. So obviously people organize themselves in social movements, in larger groups, and then it becomes a political battle, which is even more intense. So this is an issue we have to be aware of. Skipping a bit to land demarcation, that will be in regards to indigenous people, to quilombola people, and we'll focus on them for now, so we don't take too long. But what I was saying about demarcating the land, that's especially that it is a physical process where you need surveys, where you need to physically demarcate the land, and then you need to build a legal document to present to the government. The government needs to be willing to accept that. And so just to demonstrate that this is it's a process that unfortunately doesn't have as much support as it would need to in order to be not even fair, but in order to happen. And we see in the quilombola communities, which are communities established by escaped slaves throughout the centuries in Brazil, who, of course, at first to protect themselves against persecution, created communities and then started living and producing, and now they exist in those territories, but they may not be recognized and even less certified by the government as the owners of that territory. So in order for them to have access to public policies, in order for them to have access to lines of credit, in order to buy some seeds to grow to make their agroforestry, a lot of the times that doesn't happen. It wasn't until the Constitution, which only came in 1988 after 21 years of dictatorship in Brazil. So we went from a colony to, uh, let's say, an economic colony of European and then North American countries to dictatorship, in which you had the 1964 coup, which now we are aware of, that the CIA even had an influence on, and you have the same elite trying to maintain control of the country and violently quelling rebellions and revolutions. And only in 1988 you have this right recognized by the Constitution. And unfortunately, even though there are communities that quote unquote are recognized by the state, they still don't necessarily have any rights to that land. Only 206 have been allegedly certified by 2018, but still they face issues with accessing some rights and infrastructure. Both of these groups that have to do with land reform, that have to do with land demarcation, and also, let's say, any and all smallholder family farmers may face land grabbing practices. But then, of course, especially uh, indigenous people and quilombola communities, because they will more often than not have a territory which is larger than a single farm, and that will be more sought after by these aggressors. Uh, so you will have either large scale farmers financing land grabbing, or you will have violent land grabbers who want to become large scale property owners. But then going back to the people that we're talking about and trying to refocus not so much as the adversary, but on who we're thinking about, it is a very diverse family farming in Brazil is a very diverse category, because as we've seen, um, it's not only the small holding farmers, but also these communities that will produce and have their livelihoods dependent on small scale agriculture. And so just this has already been. So we're nearing the end of the presentation, and I'm going back to the threats that we're facing right now, which is starting with the 1% of landowners who own nearly 50% of the productive lands. The people that they may hire in order to practice land grabbing. The current government, because it's up to the executive power to take actions towards land reform and towards land demarcation. So we now have a government that is against that supports land grabbing, that supports large-scale farming, that supports agribusiness. And since most of those attributions are from the government, then we have this situation where they are a threat to the environment, to the communities, to family farming, and to the survival of the human species. And not only the executive power and the government in that sense, but also there are large parliamentary caucuses that represent gun ownership, which the land grabbers are in favor of. Agribusiness as a whole, commodity exporting, right? There is This is the biggest caucus in Brazilian parliament right now. You have a really big neo-Pentecostal caucus who not only would like to have indigenous and quilombola lands not be recognized as such, but in a way to be exploited economically, they want to go in and convert people into Christianism and erase their culture and reach assimilation of them within Brazilian society. And they are also part of the government and supported by the government. And then you have their supporters in public opinion, people who vote for them, and people who are vocal about these issues, these far-right supporters who are at least 30% of the population, and who, are the backbone of support for these policies. And lastly, you have the umbrella issue that will determine why Brazil is a commodity exporting country. It's not only because the elites decide that they don't care about the people working and they want to exploit their labor in these monoculture enterprises. It's also because there is a free capitalist global market who wants to buy these commodities at the lowest possible price. So there you have the underlying issue. So just to exemplify here, this it's in Portuguese again, but it will show you the export of commodities. And the soy will be 14% of all of Brazilian commodity exports. And then you have oil, but then you also have here, one moment please, meats. And why I point that out is because the food, the rations given to cattle especially, will come from the soy. So the soy is made to feed the cattle, which is made to be sold. The soy itself is sold or processed into other like fake meats or oils and etc. All the possible soy products. Here we can see that the biggest buyer of such products is China, but followed by the EU and the USA. Um, Obviously, a lot of other countries as well. But here we can see where the support, the financial support, the economic support, the capital is coming in to help these aggressors. These are the biggest buyers of soy from Brazil in from Brazilian agribusiness in 2020. First one is China, obviously, but followed by the Netherlands with 6% of the financing of this destruction, this environmental and socio-cultural destruction of the Amazon, of other Brazilian biomes, is maybe going into our fake meats. And then just to close the idea, you also have the bovine or the meat, the beef exports. And also you have China, followed by Hong Kong, Egypt, and Chile. And maybe we can't really do a lot about what China buys or not buy, but I thought it was important to bring this information as well. And I think that is basically what I wanted, the kind of information that I wanted to bring to start with. Maybe we'll have some questions, but first I would like to call Titon, Lucas Titon, who is my colleague at CONAFER, and he is going to talk a little bit about the things that are happening right now or that have happened recently relating to these issues that we're talking about. And hey, Chiton, are you there?
Hey Phil, I'm here. Can you listen to me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. So my name is Lucas Titon. I'm the National Secretary of Communications from CONAFER. As Phil told us, CONAFER is the National Confederation of Family Farmers and Rural Family Entrepreneurs. We exist since 2011. Um, the Confederation is a third degree entity here in Brazil. So the first degree entities are the unions. We have unions in the cities of family farmers, family farmer unions. And then when the a state has at least five unions in their cities, we can build a federation from the state to bring the issues from the family farmers straight to the state government. Uh, in the moment we had eight federations in Brazil, we were able to create the Confederation. That's a third degree entity to support the family farmers in Brazil. So we bring the issues from the unions, from the federations, straight to the federal government, and we fight for public policies and strengthening the communities, their culture and their production. So we work for the family agriculture in Brazil, but we understand that family agriculture is not just peasants. We understand this diversity, as Phil told us. So we work with all the originary people here in Brazil. So indigenous people, quilombola communities, riverside folk, small fishermen, and other small communities that are really the first real family agricultures here in Brazil. So in CONAFER, we have today 25 secretaries inside the entity, and 10 of them are dedicated to work with the issues of the originary people, bringing public policies and fighting for demarcation and land reform, as Phil told us. I'm going to give you some examples in a few minutes. Uh, and the CONAFER works with all the spectrum inside the family agriculture. So we have deals with the government, we have deals with private companies too, to bring a lot of benefits to the family farmers. So right now we're working with credit for them to produce with autarkies here in Brazil. We have cooperation agreement with Banco do Brasil, is the biggest bank here in Brazil, to bring credit for the farmers. With that, we met is the major issue for them to produce is to have this initial capital. So we're working in different areas. We also believe in the entrepreneurship. So we stimulate them to build micro industries to make their products better, but without leaving the agriculture system of agroforestry and the permaculture and organic production all the way. So in all of our bases, we don't work with any toxics. We only use natural methods. And right now, we're becoming one of the biggest voices in family farmers here in Brazil. We are fighting for public policies for 36 million family farmers here in Brazil. So I'm going to give you some examples of what Phil told us about the land reform and demarcation and land grabbing that are the bigger issues here in Brazil, at least for our sector. So about the land reform, we had a project in 2018 called Rapatra that was to map the families that were in settlements, government settlements, but they didn't have the scripture of their land yet because of several issues. So this project went to 12,000 families to do a full quiz with them, an hour-long quiz that we could map the whole property, the production, the hydric system, and especially how they were working with this production. So we could bring more agroforestry and other environmental friendly production for them. Here in Brazil, for a person to access credit, they need a document called DAP, that is the Declaration of PRONAF. That's one of the programs. And in order to get this document, they need to have 30% of the area preserved. So if they have 1,000 meters squared area, at least 300 meters square needs to be the native vegetation and the biome. So throughout this project, we were able to interview the 12,000 families, map their areas, and bring the scripture to them. We made the whole data system, and we sent to the government to start the process of giving them the scripture. That's one of the works we did for land reform here in Brazil, because throughout the later governments, we had a lot of occupations, a lot of settlements created, but they didn't give the scripture to them. So technically, it's not uh, the family farmers' land; it's still the state land. So we're fighting to give this scripture to them, so they can actually own the land they're producing. Some families are producing over 30 years in the same land and they still don't have the scripture. So that's one of the issues here regarding land reform that we were working since 2018. About land demarcation, we started working with the indigenous people in 2016. They went to us to ask for help, especially in the production area. But throughout the years, we were able to help them in other areas too, as demarcation. So we have two good examples of fights we are struggling here. One of them is the motherland, what that we called. Is the place that the Europeans landed here in Brazil. The first indigenous land they land is in near Porto Seguro in Bahia. So it's a land from the indigenous people Pataxó, and they had a land of 54,000 hectares uh, of, of size, and the government, they recognized those 54,000, but they only live in 8,000 of this land. So 48, no, 46,000 hectares of this land is being appropriated for land grabbers and giant farmers around the originary territory. So it's one of the fights we're struggling since 2016 to expel these land grabbers from there, because it's already recognized. But we have the big farmers are blocking the justice with their influence anyways. So they use their influence and their status and their power, their money, to block all the legal process. But we are still struggling. The other example of a land demarcation fight we're having here is with the Tupinamba people in Pará, that they have a originary land, a huge one, more than 50,000 hectares, near the Tapajós River, one of the biggest river in the Amazon area, and the government pushed them to be registered as extractivists. So they had to deny their culture and their traditions and register themselves as extractivists. So all the originary land was uh, certified as a extractivist reservation. So the government can explore the land indefinitely. So that's one of the fights we had too, because the indigenous people were tricked by the government. They didn't know about that. They just signed the documents. The government said it's going to be good for them. It's going to bring better stuff for the territory. They can produce more. They can preserve more. But they were tricked because they're not really extractivists, and that opens the whole area for other companies, other people, major farmers to get in to land grab, and it's been a big fight we're having too. Regarding the land grabbing, we have two examples here in CONAFER as well. One of them is the work we do with the indigenous people in the Xingu National Park. We work with 17 different communities, especially the Kuikuro people, and they were the last year especially they were having a huge fight against the people that went there to set fire to the forest so they can bring cattle in. The whole area that's certified by the government is shrinking every year because around it there's the huge cattle producers and they are eating the forests uh, tree by tree, you know. So they have to fight against them, especially the fires. It has been a year that the fires were bigger than the last years. The land grabbers are very organized inside this government, and they synchronize the action. So it's been a really hard fight too. And the other example we have is one of example of success actually is the Patashahahahan community. They expelled 396 land grabbers inside their territory in a period of 30 years. We only were able to help in the last event because CONAFER only exists for 10 years, but we saw the end of it, and now they have the whole territory back to them, and they were expelled house by house, land grabber by land grabber, one by one. And today they have the whole territory back, and there are more than 4,000 families there in 13 different communities. So this is one of the few examples of the fights we take here in Conifer, and we really think we can change the system throughout production, sustainable production, in peace with the environment and working with the environment. And so today we teach the indigenous people and the peasants and family farmers how to plant their products within the nature, within the forest and the native vegetation here. So the vegetation can strengthen the products, and the products can strengthen the native vegetation. And we're doing this work and hoping uh, every day we can make the environment a little better and those communities a little stronger. So I think that's it. If they have any questions, I'm open for it. And thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Chitong. That was very important. The information that you brought from what's happening in real life in Brazil. Sorry, do you want to say something, Mark?
Uh, no, I wanted to agree with you. It was really nice to like the explanations of you, like the bigger picture, and then have these really concrete examples of like fights and like the struggles and also the success. I mean, it really got give a broad picture of what is
Yeah, that's
happening.
what we were going for. Thank you.
It was so cool.
I was wondering if, well, before we open to questions, I just wanted to say, so I think the conclusion for me is that there are threats we need to be aware of, and there are people that are doing it differently that we could be strengthening. There are agribusiness that we could be demonetizing, boycotting, and through the strengthening of the production cycles within sustainable framework, if we can strengthen that, then we take away the economic power from agribusiness, and that's, I think that if there's any solution, it's probably in that direction.
Yeah.
Anyone?
You have a question? I would have a question. Well, I just thought, yeah, the economic power, but it's so difficult to name a soy company that like buying from all these big farmers and bring it to Europe or to China or whatever. No, these are also companies, but I don't know anyone or any name of this company, of this like
Yeah,
traders kind of.
I would say it's not even about big companies, but mostly about, because it goes on the market.
Hmm.
It's not necessary. I mean, there are big companies, but it's not. It's more of a market environment where if it was regulated in a way where it was not allowed to have been produced in monoculture, for example, or if it was not allowed to have certain pesticides. There are ways to regulate it out of, maybe not regulate it out of existence, but regulate it in a way to strengthen a different sector. But
Yeah, yeah,
that's not necessarily something that is very reachable individually or in small groups wise, but that's something to keep in mind of for geopolitics or big yeah, I wouldn't even know what to call it, the kind of regulatory process for that. I don't know where, in what sphere that would happen, and it wouldn't be the most radical thing, but still, there are things that can be things that can be done, but yeah, and then it starts becoming a bit more abstract how to do them.
One of the things is we can search for companies that have a green seal or something, that they buy the soy, they sell the soy, but they do something else to the environment, like credits of carbon, or have some preserved areas. It's at least one thing that the company is trying to do something to make it balance the production of soy and the environment. But it's still a small thing to do in face of those big markets of soybeans.
yeah. Just thought also these companies influence the whole policy making process. No, I know from in the EU, um, yeah, big oil companies. I'm more in the climate movement also, and this big oil companies like Shell or Eni or like in Switzerland, where like the big banks, they are making the policy, and if you can also attack them together with politicians, you're getting more like movement momentum, like yeah, and can gather people. But with I know Yara is the biggest fertilizer producer, so they produce nitrogen fertilizer, bring it to Brazil also and produce it there, put it on the soy fields, and then put the soy back. But yeah, this soy
Yeah,
Cargill
and that's not
maybe.
a Brazilian company.
No, it's a Norwegian company.
Yeah, no, exactly, like the companies, the big companies
Yeah,
are not going to be Brazilian companies.
yeah,
Yeah,
right, right.
And there's another thing that in Brazil, the agrotoxics that are allowed
pesticides.
are the pesticides. They are so many that are allowed here that are not allowed in Europe.
Yeah,
So that's one of the things they choose to buy from Brazil, because they use a lot of those chemicals too.
yeah. Yeah, we had every year a march against Syngenta in Basel because it's the headquarters of Syngenta. So we also had there a lot of this talks about which pesticides are allowed here to and not allowed here, of course, like forbidden 30 years, 40 years ago, and still selling in other countries like in Brazil. It's so toxic and stupid. I don't know.
Around the Xingu National Park of indigenous people, we have Syngenta, Monsanto, and Bayer in huge areas. They control whole cities around it because of the soybeans and the cattle too. They work together now. They make the soybeans work faster, so they can feed the cow faster and sell the product faster. And throughout that, they destroy the whole system around.
And also a lot of people working for them.
Yeah, they control the whole economy of those cities.
Yeah, yeah,
If they leave the city, there would be a economic collapse. That's one of the things. They make cities hostage, you know,
yeah, yeah,
with the economic system.
I have a question about the land demarcation. you say that there is indigenous people who is fighting for the motherland. What do you mean by that? Collective ground?
The motherland's how they call it, the first land where the Europeans came here in Brazil in the year 1500. It's the first contact they had with the Europeans, and it's a land traditionally that had a lot of violence, a lot of wars, a lot of land grabbing by force, and they had decades of struggle to get back this land. We had this letter from the year 1600 something that said the land from these people is a letter from the people here in Brazil to the Portugal kingdom, saying that they live in a 50 Phil, how do you say leguas? Do you
Yeah, I
know?
think it's leagues.
Leagues, 50 leagues square from the
Leagues.
beach,
Yeah.
and that's way bigger than the area they have today. So we use this first document as the basis to getting into the legal justice.
Oh,
We use this letter before there was a Brazil, the Federated Federative Republic of Brazil. Before that exists, the w- when it was the uh, empire here, still we use this letter as a basis to the whole process, the legal process. So they have 54 hectares square demarcated, and the Ministry of Justice already signed it, but the indigenous people didn't know that. They live in 8,000 square hectares, and all the other area is being land grabbed, and the indigenous people didn't even know that. So we searched that, we discovered that, and we had to warn them, hey, they are taking your land, and you don't know that. And when we did that, they start to pushing back against those farmers, recognizing their land as their own.
Um,
Mm.
I believe that may be it. I don't know if anyone has any other questions or comments.
Just to complement, one I guess one of the biggest examples in Brazil is the Magi Group. That I guess it's the biggest soy conglomerate here, national conglomerate, and we have the in the council we have Blairo Maggi, that is the main family representative, and he's a senator here and fight for the company interest, as well as the biggest companies, multinational companies like Bunge, um, Cargill, that make this a trade, the farmers. They they give money to farmers, and in exchange, the farmers sell the soy to them.
Yeah.
Those companies, they even buy the soy before planting them. They give the money to the people to plant the soy, and already and knowing that when it's harvest time, they will get everything.
I mean, or I just thought that it's nothing bad. Or here it's like nice to have this solidarity with farmers that you have a fixed price, a fair price. But often it's like super cheap, no? They buy it to a cheap price and then can sell it later. Because in the city, if people can pay the farmer in front for the whole year, the farmer has a security. So I just thought, yeah, that's actually cool. But no, wait, it's then too
But
cheap.
they don't do it with the small farmers. They do
Yeah,
it
yeah,
with the big agribusiness.
yeah, of course.
We actually talk to the government, and we try to bring this policy to the small farmers too, but not throughout the market, but throughout the state government,
Yeah, yeah.
so they can ensure that the production will be done, even though they have adversities and stuff. It's like a security for them.
And how is that going? So you requested that, and did you have an answer? What's happening?
We're in the process. We're talking to several politicians, congressmen here, and they will form a front of action to bring a proposal to the constitution.
Thank you. And thank you, Bruno, for your comment as well. I really put everything I had in the presentation. So.
No, thank you so much. I don't know if you have any comments or questions left.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Very illustrative, very important. Thank you.
Thank you guys for listening, for becoming aware of the issue, and for the solidarity, and for us all being together here, even though we're not necessarily in the same physical space.
And we're open to dialogue, to work together. Just search for CONAFER Brazil, and talk to us. My email, I'm gonna put it here in the chat. If you want to talk to me, you can talk. We can send messages and trade experiences and maybe work together.
CONAFER. Cool. Thank you so much.